Thank you very much for everybody joining us today. You're very welcome to the UK, what we've titled the UK Government Support Scheme for Tech Businesses under COVID-19 Outbreak and Practical Advice around Contractual Issues. Sorry if I'm looking to the left occasionally. I just left my list on another screen so I could keep this open. So first off, very welcome. What we're going to do is we're going to briefly run through with our panelists and ask them a couple of questions and to explain what's available right now. And then at the very end, we'll go through any questions that you may have. We'll try and get through as many as we can, but with the nature of things, it's sometimes difficult to get through all of them. So if you can pop some questions down the bottom right-hand side of your screen where it says to drop in the messages, one of our team or myself will be able to come back to any questions you have and hopefully get through them in a quick manner. By way of background, I think it's important just to tell you a little bit who I am and also about Wayra. Wayra is an accelerator and investment company based in the UK. We have about a good bit over 190 different portfolio companies in the UK with a combined value of about $1 billion. Our function is to basically innovate Telefonica, but also to accelerate and scale future tech companies with our strategic partners and Telefonica. So the back of what has happened around COVID, which is terrible, and we're hoping that everybody's okay and makes it through safely, we wanted to contribute like we've seen so many out there doing, and equally the panelists have kindly given their time to do this too, as well, to explain some of the things that are out there to help you and people through this difficult, hopefully a short-term issue. So I'll briefly go through who the panelists are. So there's myself, I'm on the board of directors of Wayra UK and Wayra Social Ventures, and background was I was assistant admin who became a lawyer. I'm also involved in Irish or Telefonica Group matters as well. I won't bore you with my details. Next person is Stuart Griffin. Stuart is responsible for corporate and commercial transactions across the GSMA group, which includes the Mobile World Congress series of events. He's also the legal lead of all of the GSMA's engagement with early stage companies. So we're very happy to have him on board. Our second panelist is MJ Rippon. Maddie is a Wayra legal coach and fills a familiar role at WeWork Labs and Ignite. MJ also works as part-time general counsel to a number of tech and digital media businesses. He's worked in the sector since the 90s, so he knows his stuff, and he has a unique and great way of looking at things and having a great perspective on what's actually the heartbeat and the pulse on the out there in the tech scene at the moment. So we're glad to have him too. Fraser Matcham is CEO of Legal Utopia. He's our third panelist, and this is a startup creator of a self-help legal checker app built for SMEs called LUE, and the consultant director of legal innovation of Westminster Law School. Since 2016, Fraser has also been the legal manager to the Travel Spot Group, which operates in the construction, travel, and online retail sectors. So we're very happy to have him on board for this panel. And finally, our final panelist is Matthew Santer. Matt is a commercial associate in the interactive team of Sheridans. He advises a wide range of people and business on commercial and IP matters, including digital media and in the creative media and sports industries. He's currently leading on the firm's guidance and advice on the COVID-19 crisis, particularly its impact on the UK business and workers. So we're equally glad to have. So that's our panel. That we'll hopefully be able to go through all the points that we want to. So what are we going to talk about? Well, we don't want to get too overly legalese, and we're going to try and keep it as practical as possible. So I'll briefly synopsis of what we're going to do. We're going to look at what UK government scheme incentives are out there to support companies during this difficult time and the practical steps to access them, so such as available loans and financing schemes, job and income protection schemes, business grants and release. Secondly, we're going to move from, if you like, the statutorial or the things that are out there in the schemes and talk about general tips and real life practical advice. So what way do you handle these scenarios that are unfolding right now? So we have on hand people who are actually dealing with situations as they have arose in the last number of weeks, and they will be here on this webinar to give you practical, if you like, know-how and tips to how to look at the situation and best get the most that you can out of the situation going forward. Then we'll do, if we have time, a brief general chat, and then following which we'll move to our Q&A and hopefully get through as many questions as we can. So let's move to our first agenda items, which is to look at what UK government schemes. I propose that we go directly into available loans and financing schemes. And at this stage, I would invite Matthew or Matt to detail around the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme, also known as CBILS. I'll hand you over to Matt now.
Thanks a lot, Niall, and hello to everybody. Thanks for tuning in. It's great to be here. So just give you an idea of what the government have offered currently to SMEs, firstly, and then a little bit on what's available to larger companies across the UK as well. You've probably seen, or may have seen in the press, just as a forerunner to this, to the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme, that there are going to be significant changes to the eligibility requirements and some of the borrowing requirements generally on this scheme to enable businesses to get better access to it. So just has that as a pretext, but let's go into a little bit more of the practical detail. It's essentially replacing temporarily the EFG, which is the Enterprise Finance Guarantee, which you may not heard of, but it gives SMEs up to, that's any businesses with 250 employees or less, access to financing through banks where they wouldn't necessarily be able to gain that finance on normal commercial borrowing terms. Obviously, with this terrible situation we're finding ourselves in, the government have teamed up with the British Business Bank, or they're offering guarantees through the British Business Bank to banks, to high street banks, so the Lloyds, NatWest, Barclays of the world, to offer financing options to help with cash flow, to service current outstanding invoices, that kind of thing. So the largest ones are term loans, so you can get those for up to 6 years, and then you can get things like invoice financing and extended overdrafts for up to 3 years. So just to give you some, context as to why they're doing it. Obviously, businesses of all sizes have been affected significantly by, having to shut their doors effectively. That's businesses with premises or without it, businesses of all kinds across all sectors. A lot of startups have obviously been affected as well. So they've tried to enable short-term, hopefully cheaper borrowing for these companies and other types of businesses. So it doesn't discriminate. It's companies and sole traders or other types of business, just SMEs generally in the UK. And it's a way of basically giving access to borrowing where they, again, like the EFG, where they wouldn't necessarily meet the requirements of banks to borrow on commercial terms. So what the CBILS has been dubbed the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme is access through banks directly. So what you would need to do, on the assumption that you all have, if you're a business, you have a business account, which is one of the main requirements. You would talk to your existing banks. If they can't offer you support or financing on their normal terms, then they will basically look to see if you are eligible for the scheme. It's not entirely helpful, but the actual way of accessing it is through the banks directly. So you can look at all the information on the British Business Bank website, and there are obviously there's lots of commentary on this now as well. But the banks will be the best place to go to in the immediate short term. So they will give you an idea of what they're requiring. Just as a general eligibility requirements, turnover maximum is 45 million for businesses, so that those are the businesses that have access to this scheme. Also, it will be for businesses that are more than 50% of their turnover has to be from trading activity. It's UK-based SMEs, as I've already explained, and that's the main business requirements. There's a little bit of confusion about there's a restriction around receipt of state aid as well, but they first had that as a requirement, then removed it, and now it seems to be back on the eligibility requirement. So as I mentioned at the beginning, there's going to be some big changes apparently coming in tomorrow from the Chancellor. So apologies if this is outdated by tomorrow evening, but it's they're trying to make it a lot easier for companies to access the financing, and that's from anything from £1,000 up to 5 million. That's the current bracket in terms of limits on borrowing. And it doesn't necessarily have to be term loans, as I say. There are overdraft options and that kind of thing, just to assist with cash flow. And that's accessed through, there's a list of 40 plus accredited partners. So they've teamed up with major high street banks as well as more specialist lenders that deal with things like invoice financing and that kind of thing.
Great, thanks, Matt. I think just following on from what you've just said, if I can ask, obviously there's certain terms that will come with any kind of finance. What are normal commercial terms classified under this? Do you have any kind of insight you can give to the attendees?
It's again probably an unhelpful answer, but it really will depend on the lender that you go to. So you'll have the standard kind of Lloyds, the NatWest and the Barclays of the world who want to obviously ensure that they have some security in the way of interest, not secured borrowing. But it will be a case of, well, if you have a good business proposal for borrowing to either expand or acquire just any kind of business transaction that you'll need significant injection of cash for, or at least to maintain cash flow, it's quite dependent on what those banks will require in terms of eligibility. So normal commercial terms will be, obviously, you're in a sound financial position, which in the current situation is a little bit difficult. So the reason the scheme has been brought in is that if they can't offer you normal commercial terms in the current situation, i.e., coronavirus has significantly impacted your business, and if prior to the crisis, the business was in good financial shape, then they will look at giving you access to the scheme. Because I think overall, it's been, to be perfectly honest, there's been a bit in the press about the fact that some businesses can't get access. So again, this could all be, changed by tomorrow evening, but there doesn't seem to be much of a shift aside from not being able to give security for the borrowing, there doesn't seem to be much of a shift in terms of what they require. And there's still talk of banks asking for personal guarantees, which again isn't ideal in the current situation. So I guess shorter answer is commercial terms will be pretty much completely dependent on what the banks require. I would suggest that the larger banks will be fairly comparable, but some of the other finance types will be very, very lender specific.
Great, thanks, Matt. And just one other quick one for you. Is it true that there's interest free, and what's the period of time on this?
Yeah, so what the government are doing are paying the interest for a period of 12 months, so the first 12 months of finance, after which point the borrower will begin paying the interest themselves. It's important to note as well that the borrower is 100% liable for the debt and for the borrowing, but the interest could shave off quite a significant part of that repayment period. So that's 12 months which the government will be paying the interest. I believe it's going to be issued to the borrowers, and then they use that specific pool of money to pay the interest, rather than you just pay the principal. The money will be provided to you to pay the interest. That's what it's looking like it's going to be. It's all very fluid and it's changing pretty much daily, but that's how they're doing it at the moment. But yes, that could be attractive, particularly for some shorter term loans. If you're just borrowing for 12 months, it could be the case that you are effectively having an interest-free loan for that period.
Great. And I think with that in mind, and I suppose it's good news all around in that there's something there in place. But if I can maybe move to Fraser for my next question, because I know Fraser has some insights on this as well. Fraser, what do you think of the scheme? Do you like it? And if so, why?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, in terms of this loan scheme in particular, there's been a lot of problems with the consistency of the banks that have been accredited to lend the money. Obviously, people want to get the best terms possible, and each bank is different in where they're offering their terms, despite the scheme being one consolidated scheme offered by British Business Bank. So we're seeing a lot of banks following normal standard processes, with offering their own commercial products first, which is obviously the direction of the British Business Bank. But obviously, the people applying for those loans don't want their commercial products; they want the interest-free products, because they want to save money. And they also don't want to be providing personal guarantees when the British Business Bank is offering up 80% of the loan value as a guarantee. So there needs to be a bit of clarification, really, and consistency across the banks. Otherwise, SMEs looking for that money are going to be spending a lot of time going through those 40 lenders, trying to work out which is best, and most likely give up in the process.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's good news on Matt's point that there's going to be some kind of looking at it and announcements tomorrow, hopefully for the positive in that respect. But it's a great scheme in itself already, so we're not taking away from it. Well, I'm not taking away from it, and I'm sure the panel isn't. So it's obviously great to see that there's a support coming in from the UK government. Just on this question as well, is there any tips that you to watch for in the process that you can see, Fraser?
Yeah, I mean, I think really it's looking at the face value terms offered on the lenders' websites. We did a review of all 40 lenders, and it's actually 38 lenders. One came out because they didn't have the capital available to offer the loans, and another came out because they didn't have the resources to facilitate them. So really, it's 38. From our review, we see HSBC, NatWest, and Ulster Bank offering the most transparency and flexibility in their terms. So offering up loans for self-employed partnerships and limited entities, and obviously providing no personal guarantees for up to 250,000 in loan value. So those are the ones that I would stop by first.
Great, thank you. I think what we'll do is, I know there's a few questions coming in already. What we'll do is we'll move on to the next point, because I'm conscious of time, and a legal seminar is always difficult for people to sit through anyway. So we'll move on to the next point and hopefully cover some areas to keep them engaged on it as well. So with that, I'd like to move to the next point of our agenda, which is COVID Corporate Financing Facility, CCFF. I'd like to invite Fraser to maybe give us a kind of synopsis and some details on it.
Yeah, so this facility is being offered directly by the Bank of England, and the intermediaries here are a list of banks, again, the people that are actually bridging that gap. The facility is aimed at facilitating the purchase of commercial paper. So when we talk about commercial paper, we're talking about unsecured short-term debt. So the actual minimum nominal value of this debt that they're purchasing is actually £1 million. So we are talking about the higher end of sort of business size. So you need to be having at least £1 million in unsecured debt, with a maturity of at least 1 week up to 12 months. So there is a limitation there. It can't be a debt older than a year. And the actual facility, depending on credit rating, it can go up to £1 billion. So you can get that support. It can be quite helpful for the larger organisations, particularly if you've got a lot of employees, you need to pay at the end of the month, and you need to lighten up that liability so then you can open up your cash flow. So recommendation there is, if you are a business with a lot of short-term, again, unsecured debt, it's something to take a look at. In terms of taking a look at it and going forward, the best thing to do is speak to your bank. If you're at this sort of stage in the marketplace, then you're going to have an account manager with your banking provider, to speak to them. If you're unsure or don't think that your bank could help, there is actually a list you can go to on UK Finance that actually is quite helpful. It gives you all those that are a party to the facility, but also it gives you the direct phone numbers and emails and names of the people who talk about the banks. So those are your usual suspects: Barclays, Credit Suisse, JP Morgan. Those guys can help. It is worth noting that the debt should be sterling denominated, so it can't be USD or yen, or it has to be sterling pounds. So the debt has to be issued via Euroclear or Clearstream. So they're financial services supporters, and they can also help, along with the Bank of England, with getting a credit rating. So although the Bank of England does say it's where available, to get an idea of what sort of size you can get on your commercial paper. It is preferable to obtain a credit rating. So the actual credit rating can range from A3 up to A1, if you even know what that means. And actually, by having that credit rating, you can get an idea of the max value of the amount of commercial paper that Bank of England will purchase. So it's worth considering that. Also, on that point, that is your credit rating as of the 1st of March 2020, so before all of this happened, before the government intervened in business. So don't think that just because your credit rating might have changed ever so slightly or a lot in the last month, you will be based on the 1st of March credit rating. Another point on eligibility, any company can apply in the UK and its financial subsidiaries, but you have to be making a material contribution to the UK economy. To give you an idea, you could be headquartered over here, you could have a lot of employees or generate a lot of revenue in the UK, and you'll qualify. But there is an exception that anybody providing regulated financial services, for instance, including building societies, insurance companies, and others regulated by either the Bank of England itself or by the FCA, will not be eligible, so you'll be excluded. And the final point to consider, particularly now, is if you are a public body or authority, or you have influence by the state, then you won't qualify. The reason I highlight that is, for instance, there's a lot of support opening up for medtech companies and health tech. And if you're thinking about taking on finance or investment from government or a local fund that's been announced recently, you may end up excluding yourself from being able to access this facility. So it's worth considering all options, particularly what we previously covered, which is the business interruption loan. It might be better suited for you. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much, Fraser, and Matt, for going through them points. I think we've kind of touched on the finance and the loan section, and if I might suggest we'd move on to then our next section, which would be around job and income protection schemes. What I'd like to do is invite Fraser again, just to quickly summarise the job retention scheme and to give us some background on that, and I might have a couple of questions for him as well.
Yeah, so this scheme is probably the most interest to everybody. It's certainly going to be making a difference for a large section of the public. So this is arguably the most helpful. The scheme provides employers with a lifeline in paying its employees for March, April and May up to including the 31st of May, and hopefully will be extended if necessary. So all businesses are eligible. And your employees paid via your PAYE payroll, so that includes your full-time employees, your part-time employees, anybody in an agency contract, as well as those on a flexible 0 hours contract. They all qualify, but they have to have been on the payroll as of the 28th of February this year. So if you have an employee that's started 1st of March, they're not on the payroll yet, they're meant to be for this month. They weren't on the 20th of February, they won't qualify under the scheme. So do make sure that they were admitted to your payroll as of the 28th of February. There is a requirement, so in order for you to benefit from the scheme, you must furlough your employees that you're looking to claim for. So this is providing a temporary leave of absence to your employee. So it's rather a new term in the UK. It's something that's been termed out in the US. Essentially, employees don't come to work, don't conduct any work from home. It's essentially 3 months holiday for your employees if you start from the 1st of March on 80% pay. So the funding has been clarified quite helpfully on the government website now by HMRC, and they're providing a coverage of 80% of the basic usual monthly wage of the employee up to the value of £2,500, and that's per employee per month for 3 months. It's worth noting as well that your employers' national insurance and pension contributions, if you do have any. That is on top of that £250, £2,500, sorry. So it is worth considering that. There are a range of considerations, particularly around employee contracts and the formalities of furloughing employees. So it is an idea to really consider who is of value to your business in terms of delivering services or products that you have, and who you don't need in your business right now because of the effects of COVID-19.
Thanks, Fraser. I suppose you touched on what was going to be my first question about, is it backdatable? You've gone through that. But as a follow-on question from that, I was thinking, can this apply to someone already laid off? And so can you bring them back into the company, or is it just people that you're laying off as right now?
Yeah, so this is the spirit of the scheme. The scheme is there to prevent redundancies, keep people on the payroll, and keep your business going, so that when you come back, or hopefully come back, you can kick off again. So you can bring back people that have been laid off. So if you've laid off somebody from the 20th of February onwards, before the scheme is announced, you can reintroduce them into the business, and they can qualify for the scheme. So if you do have somebody that you immediately laid off, you can bring them back, but you have to have made them redundant from the 28th of February this year.
Thanks, Fraser. And if I can move to Matt then for this next question, because I know you have expertise in this area too. Just in relation to our attendees would probably be wondering, is there employment contract formalities that they need to consider when implementing this scheme? And if such, what kind? And if you could briefly summarise for us, please.
Well, I think it's been a difficult one for employers generally, because just to go back to a point about when staff have been laid off, it's a lot of employers have already issued P45s, for example, which will have impact on how and when they can furlough employees as well, which I think at that point we'd suggest obviously speaking to a specialist employment lawyer on that point. But if it's going to be a case of having furlough as an option, if you look at it practically, the employment contract side of things is essentially just making sure to engage in dialogue with the employees that you're looking to furlough. And also to go back to what Fraser said about the spirit of the scheme, which I think is a really important point. The scheme is to make sure that people have jobs on the other side of this crisis, be that in 3 months, be that in 6 months. So to really look at, the important thing to look at is whether they are really suitable for being furloughed. If they're business critical and there is work to do, then they probably won't fit the bill for this. So if you're looking at ones that are, maybe they're salespeople on specific campaigns or specific products, whatever it might be, and there is literally no work to do, then look at it quite black and white. I think would be my general overarching kind of advice to anyone thinking about the scheme, and making sure that you discuss with the employees that this is going to happen, and also trying to get written agreement that they are happy to undergo this change. And also there is a minimum of 3 weeks that an employee needs to be furloughed for in order to get for the business to gain back payment through the grant, which I believe is at the end of April. But that 3-week minimum is quite important in terms of getting access, because it may be the case where you furlough an employee for 2 weeks, then all of a sudden work kicks off again, everything's going relatively back to normal, or there's just some work to do. That 2 weeks won't be able to be reimbursed because that 3-week minimum is quite critical in gaining access to it.
Thanks, Matt. Yes, that's really helpful, and I think it's kind of touching on what will be the practical concerns around people and how to judge the situation correctly. So thank you both in respect of going through the details on that. And just one final quick question. I'm just conscious of time, but can you explain some more on the limits of the amounts that can be paid through the scheme? Is there set limits on it?
Sorry,
sorry. Yeah, please. Yeah.
Sorry, apologies. I thought you said Fraser. My apologies. So So the limits are 80% of an employee's salary, well, up to a limit of £2,500 a month. We understand that to be gross, so that's before any other kind of deductions. It doesn't include things like bonuses and commission. It's just a basic salary. And as Fraser mentioned as well, I think it was last week, maybe 25th of March, they announced that you could also claim on top the national insurance contributions and automatic enrolment pension contributions. So that's also helpful for employers who are obviously making those. There is also an option for employers, if they so wish, to top that up by the additional 20%, or just top it up generally. And also, we may touch on it a little bit in terms of other schemes, but if you are a director of a single director shareholder company and you're a freelancer, for example, the scheme should apply to you as well if you're paying yourself through PAYE. If you're only paying yourself through dividends, then you won't be able to access the scheme. So the limits, just to recap, are £2,500. That's up to 80% of salaries, and that will be basically paid back by the government in the form of a grant, which will be, I imagine, lump sums to cover each and every month for employees that have been furloughed.
Great. Cheers, guys. If we can, I'm just conscious of time, so I'm going to move on quickly to the next bit. So the next section that I wanted to talk about, which you both about, was self-employment income support scheme and statutory sick pay. If I can invite Matt maybe to detail some details on that, and then I might have one quick question after that.
Yeah, this is an interesting one actually. So it's been called SICE, so yeah, Self-Employed Income Support Scheme, and this is obviously support for sole traders and self-employed individuals in the UK, which tries to operate on reasonably comparable terms to the job retention scheme, but obviously for workers that aren't on PAYE schemes. So again, similar limits, but it will be for businesses with a trading profit of less than £50,000 for 2018-19, or an average trading profit of less than 50,000 over 2016-17, 17-18, 18-19, so in between 16 and 19 effectively. And that will be a case of averaging out over the 3 years, and it will be the average monthly trading profits. That's not revenue, that's only trading profits up to £2,500 per month. And how that's useful is that if you for example, you have a particularly good year 1 year, then there may not have been much work year after, and then so on and so on. The average could be helpful to people. I mean, we're looking at probably a maximum of around £7,500 in terms of a repayment before tax. It's taxable amounts, taxable grant that's being paid by the government. And also just a couple of other things that are requirements is that making more than half of your income through self-employed work is a quite important one, because obviously people may have side businesses and different things. And you'd have to be in self-employed work with a tax return for 2019. And that last point, the government have actually also, when they announced the scheme, said that if you haven't filed your tax return for 2019 as yet, there's an additional period which ends on the 23rd of April this year. So if you are a self-employed person, or if you've got anyone who's self-employed, that period allows a bit of extra time to file that for you.
Cheers, Matt. I think I'll just briefly ask one question on this because I don't want to overrun us on time. And if I can, what if you don't have 3 years tax returns or are you've also mentioned about self-employed, but I'll just double check on that as well with you.
Yeah, so how they're doing it, if you haven't got 3 years, they'll basically average it or work it out on the years you do have. So if you've got only 2 years, they'll average that out. And likewise for the 1 year tax return you have, they will assess it on that 1 year, which may be good or bad. But all in all, if you've got up to 50 grand in trading profits, that's where the eligibility cut-off is anyway. And also there's obviously a limit of 2,500 per month as well. So it may or may not affect you negatively in that sense, but that's how they're doing this, averaging it out is the current system anyway, the current idea that they're doing, and they're very quickly trying to put something in place to work out the grant repayment.
I think that will be immensely helpful because particularly with a lot of startups, they may be in their first or second year of trading, and this is just hitting them out of nowhere. So it's good to see that there's a practical understanding around that. And I think what we'll do is we'll move on to our next point, and I'll invite both of you really on the details on this, but it's business grants and reliefs, and retail and hospitality grants scheme and the small business grant scheme. Perhaps you could detail on that one as well, please, Matt.
Yeah, so there are, I mean, these schemes are focused, as you rightly say, so it's a hospitality, leisure, retail sectors, essentially trying to support businesses which have reliance on people being out and using their services and businesses or gatherings or that kind of thing. So we're talking about obviously gyms, anything that requires customer footfall, if you like, to basically alleviate the pressure on the payment of business rates, which can be significant. So there are a couple of different ones that affect the retail, hospitality and leisure sectors. There's a grant of £10,000 per property for businesses with properties that on the 11th of March 2020, that date is key, that were eligible for small business rate relief. And that's on properties with a rateable value between 12 and 15,000. And that grant will be £10,000. The good thing about this grant in particular, and I'll just move on to the slightly larger grant number, but just quickly, the local authorities will be contacting the eligible businesses, and from that point, then the businesses can apply for the grant. So in terms of being proactive, it's not that necessary at the moment, but again, it's unclear how they're doing the contacting. If it's by post, it may not be that helpful because obviously premises are closed, so it should be noted that any businesses that might fall under this should keep an eye on what's happening with the notifications. The scheme has started, but in terms of contacting, it can vary between local authorities. And then there's a slightly larger grant of £25,000, which is available to businesses with properties up to a rateable value of £51,000. So that's £25,000 per property. And again, that is for the retail, hospitality and leisure sectors. Just very quickly on the type of business that might qualify, it's all very unclear, but I think if you are very obviously in the leisure, hospitality or retail sectors, you could probably rely on the fact that if you meet the other eligibility requirements, you'll be getting some form of contact about applying. And this is another important one. It's only businesses based in England that this particular scheme, this particular grant scheme relates to, because the devolved administrations, i.e. Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, operate their own schemes. They're comparable in terms of value and eligibility, but the central government announcement is only for businesses in England. I'm trying to think of anything else on that. I'm sure the questions will dig out into detail. But
great, no, that was brilliant. Thank you very much. And if I can move then to Fraser to quickly go through in respect of the tax payment support scheme, please.
Yeah, so there's three main facilities here to help out with tax payments. So the first is around VAT. So if you are a VAT registered business, you can defer that payment for 3 months, as long as that VAT payment was due between the 20th of March and the 30th of June this year. But do note that is a deferment, so it's not wiping the payment away. You will still need to pay that liability later down the line. If you are self-employed and you do have a self-assessment payment due by this summer, so the 1st of July, again, you can defer that payment. You still need to pay it, but you can defer it until January next year, so 2021. Point on that is that there is no need to make an application, but you do need to notify HMRC that it's your intention to defer. Finally, something that's probably a bit more broad and helpful is HMRC's time to pay scheme. So exactly, if you are a business, that's any business, or and self-employed, you can contact HMRC if you have any outstanding liabilities via a dedicated helpline, and you can ask them if you could defer or set up a payment scheme to make the cash flow a bit more sustainable. Obviously, you will still have to fulfill those liabilities, but it just gives a bit more breadth. Again, lighten up the cash flow so you keep your operating costs going.
Great, thank you very much both. I think what we'll do now is we'll move on to our next section, which is towards the general tips and real-life practical advice on how to deal with contracts which have been affected or cancelled by the coronavirus, really. What we can do and what to look for, a kind of a practical discussion to manage the issues. So that's the purpose of what we're going to chat about now. I'd like to invite Stuart, Griffin and MJ as well, MJ Rippon, sorry, to kind of go through. And first of all, I'll invite Stuart to what advice would you give to startups whose commercial contracts have been affected by the coronavirus? Like, what do you think is a good idea there?
Yeah, hi everyone. Mark, can you hear me? Wonderful. So probably first bit of advice, odd one from a lawyer, but I wouldn't start waving contracts around immediately. MJ and I will come on to the more techie legal stuff in a minute. Don't forget, contracts are legal descriptions of commercial relationships. In these unprecedented times, it's relationships that will be far more valuable to your business than contracts, right? My advice to you guys is just get on top of these relationships. Work out your position. Are you the one who's unable to perform, or is it the other person? Get on a call, right? You have a unique opportunity that the whole world is living and breathing this thing, right? You've got the chance to actually get understanding cooperation. As a startup SME scale up, you don't have the time and resource for legal details at this point, and certainly you don't have time for court, right? You just cannot go down that route. You don't have the time, you don't have the money. That being said, not everyone's going to play nice, right? Life isn't a Disney film, sadly. But I love Disney films, and if there's a panel on Disney films, I can do that as well. But I digress. Let's get back to this, right? Listen, I'll finish on this, and then I'll throw it over to MJ to add. But even in normal times, court is expensive, time-consuming, uncertain, right? There's very few winners in court. Even victory has irrecoverable costs and wasted time that should have been focused on growing business. Add global uncertainty and volatility to that, and something that was uncertain just got even more uncertain. You need to embrace the unique environment where business must support business and people need to stick together. That is my overriding message. But MJ, put one to you as well on that.
Yeah, I echo everything that you say, and in particular, I would say, I mean, with particularly startups, you know, we always want to avoid litigation as much as possible. Courtrooms are like death cells for startups, but particularly at the moment. And of course, the other thing is, you know, if anybody was to start getting argumentative like that, then, you know, good luck finding a court that's actually open. So, I mean, most of the courts are closed at the moment anyway. So that's a big issue. Basically, unless it's really, really, really urgent and somebody's not doing something that they should be doing, and actually, if we're talking about actual lives at stake, then okay, maybe. But anything less than that, I would leave all of that stuff and pick up the phone. And like Stu was just saying, it's a time for relationship building as well as everything else. I mean, there's some technical things in your contracts that you might be looking at, and this is where, if you've invested in having a proper written contract, that could really help you out, particularly if you're dealing with somebody, you know, a big corporation on the other side that's being a bit aggressive with you. You know, for example, a force majeure clause. That's a clause in your contract that talks about how basically you might be relieved of obligations to do certain things in the event of something like exactly this. But even then, you need to really read that clause very carefully, because, I mean, it might be that both parties get relieved of their obligations, but it might just be one, the person that's suffering, or it might actually not even be either of you. It might just delay things for a period of time and then give the other party the right to terminate, and that could be potentially a bit of a disaster. So that might not be what we want at all. We also want to look at things like, do you actually need to find a way to get out of a contract? There is a concept called frustration, which can arise sometimes. Like, for example, if you're in the process of, or you were contracted to deliver something that might be regarded as non-essential to a customer in Italy right now, then that is just not going to happen. So that could be an example of something that is actually frustrated as a contract, so that can't happen. That won't work. So that might be something else you can look at. I think those are probably the key things. I mean, there are loads and loads of issues that you could be dealing with in this sort of situation. But in terms of stuff that's directly relevant, I would say frustration, force majeure, termination. Look at your rights to terminate contracts that you need to get out of. Do you have the right to terminate on notice, for example? Does somebody have the right to terminate in the event of this kind of scenario arising, or under a force majeure situation, or just generally because you're not able to deliver, that sort of thing? I think that's pretty much it for now.
No, that's great. Thanks very much, MJ and Stu. I suppose then, outside of the release you just spoke of, is there anything else, and maybe I'll direct this to Stuart again, is there anything else early stage companies can do to mitigate the financial impact of the pandemic that you can think of?
Yes, I've just seen a question flash up, actually, Noel, that I think I can have a quick go at for someone who makes a really good point, that for all, and I think MJ's done a fantastic overview of the force majeure clauses, but it's still quite, because force majeures are by definition rare, right? They're the things that often may ever happen. We don't have loads and loads of reference, certainly none for coronavirus. It's also outside the UK, not always as well understood as it could be. So the question that's come in around what I'm doing with contracts at the moment, what should I be doing on force majeure clause? I think, the great thing about force majeure clauses is they, as MJ said, they are what the contract says they are, right? You have the opportunity to shape and define them, shape and define what happens, and shape and define who does what. So my big advice to anyone, the question was around what do I do with it currently? My answer is this: do what you want, because you've just got the opportunity. You've seen the apocalypse. Now you get the chance to build the clause around it. But I wanted to make sure we got an answer to that. On to your question, Niall, and I'll be quick because we are home straight on time. Only a couple of things for me, and then again I'll throw to MJ to finish us off. But for me, comms is key, right? Absolutely is. Segment your approach, right? Guys, you've got customers, suppliers, employees, investors. These people all want different things and need to be told those different things in different ways. I'm trying to give you an example. All right, listen. Everybody here is using couriers every day. I've become DHL's head office, right? Everyone is couriering. Do you like the courier who says nothing and then randomly drops a box off 3 days later? Or do you like the courier that tells you when you've ordered, when your box is loaded on, when they're on the way to you, when it will be there, right? It's just a trite little example in these times. There is no comms is too much. It doesn't mean you need to comms your solution, but let people know you're on it. You will be amazed at how relaxed people come when you tell them what you're doing. MJ, I'll chuck that one over to you for anything else.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that as well. This is not a time to be hiding behind PR consultants and lawyers in terms of I think it's being as transparent as possible, particularly with your commercial partners, is key to success, I think, at this point. Anything that you can deliver is going to be appreciated. So if you're in a position to deliver anything within the confines, whether it's B2C or B2B, then that's great. People are going to appreciate that. And this is, like Stu was saying, this is the worldwide nature of this. Everybody's in the same boat, so it's just not by any means a normal situation. So yeah, no, I agree with that. I won't dribble on and use up more time.
No, that's great, guys, and I think Yeah, I was going to go through a brief general chat, but I can see that the time that we have in front of us is running out fast. But I might just comment on what you were just talking about there. For me, in any kind of contractual relationship, communication is key, whether it's the beginning, the middle, or the end. Whether you're in good or bad, it's all well and good to have great communications during the good time, but equally when something is not going well or when it's out of their control, it's always good to have, if you like, a direct communication. And as Stuart says, and as MJ just says, pick up the phone, contact them, and try and talk it out. Try and be civil, find an accord, find a way through that makes sense for both of you if you can. But you have an opportunity now in the climate that's in it. It's unfortunate, but it's the case that we have to deal with it. What I'm going to do now is, because I noticed that we're just hitting 4 o'clock, so I'll briefly go through a couple of questions that have come in. The first of which was around the C-bills, and what I might do is I'll direct this one to Matt if I can. It's in relation to question for considering the holiday. Do you have to pay the capital back within the 1 year period? That was a question that came in.
Yeah, it will just depend on the term of the finance you've agreed. So if you've agreed a 2-year loan term, for example, a term loan for 2 years, the government will pay the interest for the first 12 months, but not thereafter. So the principal amount will always be owing 100% by the borrower. So that's pretty much that. It's just the principal is always owing by the borrower itself, even if that term is 1 year, 2 years, up to 6 years for a term loan.
Great, thanks, Matt. The next one that has come in on the message as well was around the CCFF, and if I can direct this to Fraser, there was a mention, it says overseas companies, which are the non-UK national or companies that are based in the UK, they can still apply. I think you mentioned that there was, if you have a base in the UK, is that right?
Yeah, so the point here is that you have a material contribution to the UK economy. So you can be headquartered elsewhere, or you can have a base elsewhere outside of the UK. That's fine, but you need to obviously make a reciprocal contribution to the UK economy. There is actually a little bit of guidance on that point on the Bank of England website, so you can go onto the Bank of England's main website under the COVID-19 package, and there is a little bit more guidance around the specifics of that.
Just on, I think there's been some queries around frustration as well. Did you want to go into this one, MJ?
Yeah, frustration, or just force majeure in general?
Or force majeure, sorry.
So, I mean, on force majeure is one of those clauses that gets thrown into basically all sort of formal written contracts, and people basically never read them. And I have to say, hardly ever been an issue. And I've been doing this job for 25 years, and I can only ever remember one previous case where force majeure has come into play, and that was only in the negotiation. But the first thing, when you look at your force majeure, it's usually right at the end of your contract in the general section. The first thing to bear in mind is what is the nature of the event. So in common law, so that's like the UK, US, Australia, etc., Commonwealth countries, we don't have like a formalised state-administered force majeure system. There's nobody that stands up and says, right now we're in a force majeure situation. It's just down to how you define it in your contract. And in the UK, not in the States, but in UK contracts, it tends to be written in very broad terms with a very much a catch-all approach. So this would almost certainly be a situation where force majeure could come into play. But then the question is, to what extent do you have to be unable to deliver? Do you have to be completely prevented from being able to deliver, or merely hindered, or does it have to simply cause delays to your ability to deliver, or does it have to raise costs? All of those are options that you could potentially see in a force majeure clause. So the key one that we're looking for here is basically being prevented from delivery, because that's the clearest one in terms of being able to understand it, and then look at what is the effect of being unable to deliver. You actually have to be able to be unable to deliver on a specific obligation under the contract that you're under. So it's not enough just to be in a force majeure situation. There has to be something under the contract that you're supposed to be doing that you can't now do because of the force majeure situation. So if we can identify what that is, then we can be under a force majeure situation. Then on top of that, bear in mind the fact that you need to look at, is it just the party that is suffering the force majeure that is preventing them from delivering, that is relieved of their obligation, or is it both parties? Is the contract basically suspended? Because, for example, if you are asked to deliver something and you can't, does the other party still have to pay you for it, for example? So, you could be in a situation where you are trying to rely on force majeure, but that means you're not going to get paid anything either, which might not be a good thing. Anyway, that's kind of like a...
No, that's really helpful. That's really helpful. Thank you very much. I suppose this brings to end our webinar. First off, I'd like to thank all of our panel members. It's very much and very helpful to have you on board for this. We will have all the contact details for everybody up online, so if you do need to reach out. I want to thank the Wayra team. I want to thank Jamie as well for organising the webinar. Good stuff. And also thank all the attendees for joining us and those that are attending through the video, which will be uploaded later. And you can access it online. The link will be shared as well. On a personal note, I wish everybody health, happiness, and a speedy resolution of the current situation in business and in their own personal and family lives. Thank you all very much.